Okay, let's get started. So we don't have minutes to approve today, but we will start with roll call. Um, Simone had something come up, so she's unable to attend. So Chris Garai.
Yeah, good evening. You've tuned in to the June 22nd, 2020 Everett District Commission's virtual meeting. Thanks for joining. We'll start with a brief roll call. This is, again, Chris Garai. I am present. Simone will be potentially joining us a little bit later. Mary Fossey.
Present.
Jim Langus.
Here.
I think I heard it here. Ethel
Yes,
McNeil.
present.
Thanks, Jim. Ethel McNeil.
I'm here.
Great. John Monroe.
Present.
Kari Kloss.
Present.
Ben Young.
Present.
And Julius Wilson.
Present.
Great. All right. So we have everyone here, and I see Tony. So no minutes to approve for today. We have an agenda similar to our last meeting. We'll have some staff comments and a few comments from myself, and then we'll turn it over to Tony for a presentation, some Q&A, and some questions that we are looking to answer. Mary, I understand you had some comments. I was going to put that toward the closing segment of the meeting. Will that be okay?
Sure.
Okay. Great. So my comments, really, I just wanted to mention there was conversation last meeting about putting out a communication plan, some more information out on the city website in particular, and just wanted to provide an update that we've had some meetings about that. Some information is about ready to be presented, and probably in the next week we'll get that going and probably be sharing that on our next call as well. That's all I had for today's staff comments. Would you like to share anything, Nicole?
Flora Diaz, our representative from the city's legal department, is here today to comment on the memo she sent out around splitting precincts. So she's going to take that slot today for staff comment.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to share my screen and just put the memo up. You've all already received a copy of it.
And it's also on the website under the documents for 6/22/20 for those watching at home. You can access it there.
So one of the districting commissioners asked for more information on why we're trying to avoid splitting voting precincts between separate districts. And the short answer is that we are not coming to districting in a vacuum. There have been a lot of court cases relating to districting done in other places, other states, and we are bound by certain court precedent that relate to those previous actions. And so I gave example from a couple of cases that dealt with splitting precincts that came out of the U.S. Supreme Court. And we are, even though we're here in Washington State, bound under Supreme Court precedent. And the RCW under redistricting, which is also what we're using for districting, is not the only law that we're bound under. We're also bound under the Washington State Voting Rights Act and the Federal Voting Rights Act. And particular concern on this issue would be a Section 2 Voting Rights Act legal challenge under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And the concern there is because somebody can raise a challenge to our district that we come up with and challenge it under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, even if there's no evidence of any sort of race-based discrimination. They can still raise this challenge, arguing that there is a race-based effect. And there is a history of using the splitting of voter precincts with racist intent in other other states that have come up and been smacked down by the U.S. Supreme Court for doing so, that set a precedent where splitting up voter precincts raises a red flag for the courts. And even though it's not overtly part of the statutory criteria in Washington state, it has been acknowledged by the U.S. Supreme Court as one of the traditional districting principles that you don't split voting precincts unless you actually have to. And in our case, in Everett, we are lucky enough that we don't have to. And that's because we can have our compactness requirement as measured by the districting master's compactness equation without splitting voting precincts. It's not just about making the map look pretty, it's about the actual compactness of the area. And we're also able to have equal populations within the margin of error as measured by our districting master, also without splitting voting precincts. And because we're able to do it without splitting a voting precinct, my advice to you is not to split any voting precincts, because if we did that, and if we were subject to a Section 2 Voting Rights Act challenge, for example, then we would likely be subject to strict scrutiny. And there are other, I'm simplifying this, but we could be subject to strict scrutiny, which is the highest scrutiny that the courts use. And you only survive strict scrutiny if the government action, so the drawing of these districts and splitting voters' precincts, was actually necessary to achieve a compelling government interest. And it's not necessary because we can draw our districts without splitting voting precincts. And the couple of court cases that I provided as examples, these aren't out of Washington state, but Bush v. Vera was out of Texas, and it addressed the strict scrutiny, but it also addressed some of the, and I'm scrolling down, but the practical challenges and the reason why other people in other jurisdictions who have had ill intent towards racial equality have decided to do things like split voter precincts, because it makes it harder not only on the voters who are subject to being split into a whole bunch of different voting precincts, but it's also harder for the people they're voting for. It's harder for the people running for office to know who they're supposed to be doorbelling with or sending their mailers to, or just other sorts of traditional forms of political activity. And so I provided some of the quotes that showed some of the issues that arose in that Texas case that the court took a dim view of. There's also another example, Miller v. Johnson, where a districting plan was struck down by the court, and that's one where there was also evidence of race-based intent, but part of what the court was looking at, and I provided a quote, to the extent that the precincts were split. And so the court looked, hey, why did they decide to split these precincts? And the court found in Miller v. Johnson that a substantial reason was specifically related to race, and that there were race-based revisions, which of course is not the intent of anybody on this commission. Every single one of you have been very clear in your intent to make sure that this is as fair as possible of a districting plan that we come up with here in Everett, that it is completely equal to the extent possible when we're dealing with, water boundaries and things like that. And nobody would devote the amount of time that all of you have devoted and the amount of care and asking these important questions and challenging and asking for more information without really caring about the results and wanting to make sure that none of what happened in Texas and Georgia ever happens in Everett. But again, the intent of racial discrimination because of these court precedents is not required in order to make this sort of challenge. And again, because of these court precedents, it raises a red flag for the court if we're splitting up voter precincts, especially if we can't demonstrate that it is actually necessary. There are example cases of the Federal Voting Rights Act, including Section 2, being applied to cases in Washington state. That didn't discuss voting precincts specifically, but if you're interested, I could certainly send over information about that case. You might have heard about it after the last redistricting. So this court case was in 2013 or 2014 out of the city of Yakima, and their districting plan was challenged based on a Section 2 violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. So it wasn't about whether they followed the Washington state RCW factors, which certainly are excellent guide rails and can keep you from violating a lot of other rules if you just follow the state statute. But there was also a Section 2 Federal Voting Rights Act violation out of Yakima. And so certainly we would be subject to those same rules. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Flora. Does anyone have any questions or comments based on that?
Yeah, my only comment would be, I'm not sure I would take exception to what you said, but I find it at least for me, I relate more to a individual from Port Gardner than I do from my 26th precinct. And that's probably even more so now that we do mail-in ballots, because the only time I used to recognize that I was in the 26th precinct was when I used to have to go to vote in person, and I went to the nice person that said 26th precinct, and that's where I signed in. So I'm curious about the other commissioners. I mean, do you really pay attention to the district, the precinct that you're in, or the neighborhood that you're in?
So
I mean, just talk
again,
about neighborhoods.
This is part of the practical examples given in the Bush v. Vera case, that it's, again, Washington state is frankly far ahead of a lot of the country, for example, for having mail-in ballots. But part of the issue with splitting voting precincts is also the effect on other forms of traditional political activity like doorbelling. And so if I split the voting precinct, then some of the people that a certain representative would be knocking on doors saying, hey, vote for me, wouldn't be voting in the same district election if you're splitting the voting precinct between those district members. And then they would have a separate ballot sent out as well about who their representatives are. And so part of the practical confusion that we still face in Washington, even though we're more advanced when it comes to things like mail-in ballots, is still with those other forms of traditional political activity. But you're right that we've sort of tried to build our own system and buffer legislatively against letting race-based discrimination happen.
This is Chris. John, I would say that I agree with you in principle. I certainly identify more with my neighborhood and I probably couldn't have even told you which precinct that I'm in. But I guess from my perspective, if there's legal potential for legal problems with trying to do something like splitting a precinct, I think that probably outweighs some of those type of concepts. And then I also try to keep in mind for myself, just as we go through some of these big decisions, that there is the potential to change all that during the next cycle. If we discover that there's problems or things that could be done better, we certainly have that opportunity down the road.
I concur with what you just said, Chris. This is Jim. And, I had raised a question on precincts here a couple of months ago, and I do agree that and it's an important criteria. I believe Tony and Simone and you, Chris, if we end up in a situation, and I don't know where we will end up, frankly, but if we end up in some situation where we have some boundaries that look a little irregular because we've tried to keep precincts intact, I think Tony and Simone and yourself are going to need to be able to explain to people why we've had to do it this way, because people may look at our draft at some point and say, this, not much, this doesn't look right, common sense wise or something. And we will have arrived there because it does make sense because of what we've learned here in terms of precincts. And I don't know, Flora, whether the work you did was based on those two cases, whether it was based on congressional districts that were formed and that's what the litigation stemmed from, or whether it was actual municipal government redistricting issues. But congressional districts, I'm sure, have experienced a lot of litigation over the years in terms of how they've established boundaries. So that's a matter for you to, that's your issue. That's not mine, but it comes to mind. So.
Yes, those cases were congressional districts. That's why it was the state of Texas and the state of Georgia. But there is the city of Yakima case as an example of a Section 2 Voting Rights Act violation here in Washington, which I can, if you guys are actually interested, I'm happy to send out that information. I think it's interesting.
Well, what was going on in Yakima may have been different than anything that we've sensed at all that's going to take any of our time here. We seem to be all working together trying to find the best outcome, and there were some different matters happening in Yakima.
All right. Anyone else?
This is Kari. I would just add, Flora, yes, we're interested. Please send it, just because it's more information is good on that front. And whoever posed the question about precincts and breaking them up, thank you. It's good to know. It's because I think we are trying to move forward with this on a fair process, and we don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. Why it was set up in the first place, that's a whole other discussion. But here we are with what we have. So thank you.
Yeah, and Chris, I stand corrected. You were the one that raised the question on precincts. I just brought it up a couple times and mentioned it again, and but you were the one that raised the question on it. So I'm glad that you did here about 3 or 4 months ago, and that's a result of that. That's where we are today. So you're the one that had brought it up.
All right. Good conversation. Okay, well, without further ado, I'll turn things over to our District Master, Tony Fairfax, for our presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let me share my screen. Does everyone see the main presentation slides?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And so this presentation is really divided into 4 different parts. I don't need to really address that first one, which is addressing the whole precincts. I think that led to a conversation that we just had. We're also going to talk about the summary of the commissioner's answers to the previous districts in Plan A7, and then I'm going to provide you several example of district alternative, just so we can discuss and move to a final plan. And so just to let you know, there are 3 areas that we really have to make some determination on. And if we make a determination on each of these, then we will have a initial draft. And so I won't touch on this. Essentially, the whole precincts right now are included, using whole precincts included in the city's districting criteria, and not the states, but the city's districting criteria. And you can see right there in the document, link to the document right there. And a lot of time. Just to get you to this point, remember, we're moving from general to detail. That's our strategy and our process. And so we started off with establishing the district cores. Took a couple months. We then, when I applied the districting criteria, those district cores were surrounded with additional area. I then actually developed several initial plans, which was A1 through A3 and then B1. Submitted it to you all. You all gave me some comments pertaining to those plans, and therefore developed plans A4 through A6. And so these are now the comments or answers, if you will, to those particular plans. We had a plan B2, we had a plan B1 in that first batch, we had a plan B2 in the second batch, and we decided we're going to eliminate B1 and B2. So that's not included as any of the districts to have comments in. And so I summarize the answers, and some of them aren't really answered yet, but nonetheless, I gave my analysis of all of the commissioners who provided comments. So for example, do we include Bayside in District 1 or 2? The gist of it was to leave Bayside whole. And then the second one, which is the same thing for Riverside, and that was to leave Riverside whole. And of course, we can't do both, and we'll talk about that later. That's one of our decision points. Do we split South Forest Park? Do we place most or all of South Forest Park in District 2 or 3? And the commissioners said keep South Forest Park whole in District 3, if we can do so. Do we split Port Gardner? The desire was to keep Port Gardner whole. And we can do that in one of the alternatives of the plan, but it's not easy if we pick a different alternative plan. I'll talk about that a little bit later. The next one is, do we split Evergreen? And of course, or does Evergreen cross over Evergreen Way? And do we add it to District 2 or District 5? And once again, Evergreen is the desire to keep whole, and we do not want to add it to District 5. And once again, that can't be the case to keep South Forest Park whole in District 3 and keep Evergreen in District 3 as well. It's going to have to be, one of the two is going to have to be either dropped or split, and we'll talk about that when I get to that option. And the last one was, do we lower the population deviation to the greatest extent? And for the most part, everyone said, oh, they're concerned, but not too concerned. And that's the gist of what I got out of that. So I think there was some concern, but not too concerned. So it's telling me that as long as we can maintain within our deviation, I think that's fine for the bulk of the commissioners. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of these alternatives that we actually have to decide. And so there are three distinct areas that we have to make some determination areas. One in the north, one with South Park and Evergreen and District 3. And then I threw in one with District 4 and District 5 because there's been comments multiple times, at least a couple times, with the deviation of District 4 and District 5. So I put in some different alternative configurations so you can see some different options, if you will. So the first one that I'm going to look at, or we're going to look at, is going to be Bayside and Riverside. And so you all desire to keep both Bayside and Riverside whole. And of course, that cannot happen. So I'm going to show you, this is A7. And so when that first reiteration of A4 through A6 with B2, that desire was there, but we can't. And so my compromise was, we mentioned this precinct 18, which was that little staircase precinct, splitting Bayside, using that, and then keeping Riverside almost wholly intact within District 1, except for this. Now check the population. The census blocks, the 2010 census blocks in there, 0 population. So there's no population in there as far as the 2010, maybe population now, but remember we're looking at, when we apportion for equal population, we're looking at the 2010 population. In this area of Port Gardner, below the dividing line for Riverside, there's no population in that as well. And so at least 2010. So we are splitting it. If we're splitting it with the 0 population for 2010 for both of these. Now, if we wanted to keep Bayside wholly contained within District 1, then we would split, if you can see this, split down below precinct 18. We still have that little segment there because of the precinct configuration overlapping the neighborhoods, which we really just talked about. But pretty much Bayside is wholly contained in District 1. But in order to meet the population, you notice it's at 4.16. We're right at the borderline. We got 0.84% to go. So we actually have to take a precinct away. And so this is the precinct that is removed from Riverside in order to keep Bayside whole. And so that's one of the options that we have. Now we also could decrease District 1 more, a little more by adding precinct 10 and precinct 8. I think precinct 16 is too much. I believe it is. And so we can also chip away, if you will, more Riverside, but I think that's not the desire of the commissioner. And one of the things I want to do for us to make a decision is to go to the actual maptitude system, and we'll be open for just altering the configuration, so you will be able to see the effects of changing this immediately, if you will. And so the other one is to keep Riverside whole. And so if we want to keep Riverside whole, and I mean completely whole, even including that, we have to add precinct 20. So we have to add precinct 20, which gives us this somewhat irregular, somewhat non-compact precinct added to District 1. But Riverside is wholly contained in now District 1. That said, we now have to actually remove these precincts, 12, 13, and 18, from District 1 in order to meet that population deviation. So we have to remove those right here. We still have the northern end of Bayside included, but we have to remove this in order to meet the deviation. And so what I want to do now is to stop here and see if I can go to one, ask for questions, but I want to go to the maptitude, because here's our first decision point. How do you all want to configure Bayside, Riverside, District 1, District 2 up in the northern end? And so as I begin to shift to maptitude, I can take any questions that you have.
This is Kari. I still, and I living up in the north side, I still like the stair step option where Bayside is split. And mainly that is because when you hit the way that the houses are there and how it kind of ties into downtown, I think that it makes sense that more of the residential is north, and then you kind of have this apartment kind of maybe more renters being tied into Port Gardner and further south. So I probably was one of the people that said I don't mind if either is split. But when I hear that Riverside, we don't, like, there's zero population on that little corner of whatever precinct this is, 17, going in, doesn't affect it, then it makes it even more sense to me that you split Bayside, you pull it down. When I see the map with that irregular for Everett 20, it just doesn't look right. And I think that the people that live in the area north would agree, I would hope, with me on leaving the stair step, splitting Bayside, trying to keep as much of Riverside together as possible.
I concur with Kari.
Anyone else have any comments?
Yeah, this is John. I think that's a good approach, because the other way that I have looked at it is the way that you have split Bayside. It keeps more of the traditional business district that is in the south half of Bayside, along with the business district that is in the north side of Port Gardner. So even though it looks kind of, let's just say, ugly because it's stair-stepped, and we'll have to explain why it's stair-stepped like that, I think from looking at it from the business district side, it also makes sense to do it that way.
Anyone else?
This has been, and I definitely agree with Kari. I like the stair step from the beginning, so there is no, for me, that's where it's at.
Some more comments?
I would ask Kari a question. Kari, I think that what Ben just said, the stair step, used that term, and so did John. I think that that's fine if that's the best outcome by keeping Riverside intact. I don't know whether moving that stair-stepped area down to 25th and trying to make it more compact, whether that would get us the same outcome, or whether that now gets into splitting the precinct up and we get ourselves in trouble. But if it needs to be stair-stepped, so be it. If there's an option to move a little further south with the boundary, then maybe that's something you would want to talk about, Kari. Otherwise, I'm fine with what Ben said and what John said. So more or less a question for you.
Yeah, Jim, this is Kari. There really isn't anything we can do. It's just the precinct lines are actually in a stair-step formation. And so the first one occurs at 24th. The next one occurs, I have to zoom in, at 25th. I mean, so it's literally block by block, stair-step down. So you end up keeping, I think Everett High School probably is right on that line, give or take. But that's kind of where the houses, the traditional houses, like John said, stop. So I think we're kind of stuck with as it is, but it makes sense to me to leave it alone.
Okay.
And yes, just to further clarify it, there's 1,526 people and 18. If we add that, we will be over the 5%. Just to put this in the back of your mind, it's about 1,030 for 5%. So if we add 1,030 individuals, we're going to increase or remove 1,030. We're going to decrease 5%. So you can see that that's 1,526. That's above 1,030.
And this is Kari again. I would just add that that's because there's more apartments within that area and condos. So there's just more population, not in traditional homes, which matches what District 1 would be, give or take.
Yeah. And as I mentioned in the slide presentation, if you look through the precinct attributes, just like we had with the neighborhoods, there is a slight difference between precinct 18 and the other precincts in Bayside.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? A slight difference? How?
And if you look at the socioeconomic, the attributes, the map that I provided, it's the PDF.
Okay. Okay.
At the precinct level, they're the same socioeconomic attributes that we looked at for the neighborhood. We're now moving down to the precinct level. So you can see that in some of the attributes, they match up. They don't match up as well, let's say, with Bayside as they should, as the other precincts, let's say. So it does mean that, okay, there is a logical demarcation to make for this.
Gotcha. Well, this is Chris. I will voice a soft pitch for the other plan, which is keeping Bayside intact. The reason that I like that one is for that reason, keeping that neighborhood intact, and it also keeps Port Gardner intact. Somebody's got to be split. That said, I do like the deviation percentages on the other map are cleaner, and I definitely defer to my fellow commissioners on the north end. It sounds like there's some strong, good reasons for the other map being maybe a stronger candidate.
This is Kari again. Mary, did you have anything to add?
Yeah. I kind of want to see the data for it, I guess, because from what I hear you're saying, Tony, is I know personally the feel of walking through the neighborhood and what I see there, and you're saying that that line does kind of divide up between a difference between those two areas with removing, I believe that's district or precinct, is that 18?
Yes.
So how does that make that district look in terms of socioeconomics and diversity and everything now, if that was the district as a whole?
Well, let me see if I can go to the precinct maps. And so I provided you all with the same socioeconomic data that we had for the neighborhood. I reproduced those same values for the precinct level. And now let me warn you that these are estimates. Most of them come from 2019. And so, they're not exact. And so they're using a process called the enrichment process that Esri uses. But they do give us an idea of the difference between varying different precincts. And so I will go down. Let's go down to, for example, I guess housing structure. And you can see, maybe you can't, let me try to zoom in on this. I don't know if you all can see that these above that break point in 1940, 1950, 1940, 39, and this is 1965. So that's, it's not a dramatic difference, but it is a difference. These are newer homes and most likely renting or rather more probably rentals, if you will, or apartments in this area. So that's, I guess, one distinction. Let's move down. Income is slightly lower in that area, 44, 51, 70, 99. Let's go down again. College degree percentage, 28. It's lower. It's not significantly lower, but it is lower than the others here in Bayside. Let me move down. High school degree. Same thing. Well, this is no high school degree, rather. Slightly higher than all 13 right here has a higher one. Let's move down. Speak another language. This is 82%. Speak another language in addition to English. A little higher percentage, not dramatic. Again, 76, but it is higher. Certainly higher than these up here. Let me see. And diversity index, about the same. So it's about the same as far as diversity. And
when you say diversity, Tony, can you clarify what that means for us, please?
Sure. What Esri has done is try to determine whether there are a variety of races and ethnicities in a particular area. And so it's not as if when you say 60 or 70, you're talking 60 or 70% minority. You're talking about it is more of a diverse area than not. Do you see what I mean? So what they're looking for is, do you have multiple racial groups, ethnic groups, being Latinx, included in that particular area? And so it's just an index. It's hard to lay your finger on, except for they're looking at, it's useful when you see something that has a very low index, and that means that you have pretty much one race, one racial group, or one ethnic group inside there. And if you have it very high, that means you have a whole variety, sort of equally distributed racial groups. If you had everyone represented or many groups represented, it would probably be 80 or 90 or something like that. And then
just
last
clarification on that.
Uh-huh.
So I guess, is that specifically concerning, I guess, census identified minorities, or is that diversity more broad than that.
It's all racial groups. So it's white as well as black, as well as Asian, as well as Native American, as well as Latinx included inside. So it's just diversity. How many different groups do you have? Do you see what I mean? So that's why.
Do you consider Indian and Arabic in that as well?
No,
or are
I
those
don't.
just considered white?
Right. I don't know that specific on how they actually do it. I know that they use the American Community Survey, I believe, to base a lot of this on. And so it's going to be most likely, it's going to be, and I say most likely, it's going to be the major racial groups that are included in the census and how they calculate it. And you can look at here, you can see, there's 42, 52, 42. There's not 42% minority in these areas. What they're talking about is it's a 52%, 52 index diverse area. So that means that it's got some minority population, it's got some white population in it, and so it's a diversity index, not a minority index. In this particular case, it's about the same. So 32%. This is 2019 estimate. Again, it's an estimate off the Richmond. So this is 32% minority population percentage there, 28% there. So it's not the lowest. So in all of these, you have some that where precinct 18 doesn't fit in. But some that it's close, some that it's close. So I would lean toward it. There was more of these attributes that were a little different than not, but it is a close call.
And Tony, for those following at home, is the higher the number on the index, the higher amount of diverse population, or vice versa?
Yes, the higher amount is the more diverse population. So you have a lower amount, that means that you probably have one racial group there in that particular area.
Thank you.
Sure. And of course, the number of businesses. This begins most likely where the downtown area probably starts, right around there. That's why you see 449. Again, this is estimates. It's not exact. Any questions? Okay, let me see if I can go back. And so the first decision point would be to make a decision on the configuration of this northern area. And so if there are no other comments or questions, I would say you all need to vote on this, and we will lock that in. That becomes our first district to lock in.
So I'll start with the question. Is there any support on the commission for the Riverside option, which is I'll call it number 3?
Can you pull up the Riverside option real quick, Tony, so everybody can see?
The Riverside whole, I assume you're talking about, Commissioner.
Yeah. So I feel like we might be able to eliminate this one without,
right,
if there's not support for it. So if there's no comments, I would move that we take this out of consideration.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Or do we need to vote on that
Aye.
around the table, Nicole?
Yeah, we do. And also, who was that second?
Monroe.
Yeah. It was a split.
Ari and John?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So the
All right, well,
motion
this
is to eliminate the Riverside whole, and Chris, I'll have you call down through the list, and I'll mark people. So yay is to eliminate, and nay is to keep. Correct?
correct, yes. And this is Chris Garay. I say yay. Mary Fossey,
Yay.
Jim Langus,
Yes.
Ethel McNeil. I think you're on mute, Ethel. All right, we'll come back around. John Monroe,
Yay.
Harry Quas,
Yay.
Ben Young,
Yay.
Julius Wilson,
Yay.
and Ethel. I see you've joined again.
Yay.
Thank you. Okay. All right. And then regarding the other two options, are there any other questions? Was there any other data that anyone would be interested in seeing before we put this to a vote?
I have other data that I would like to see. I've heard from several residents recently about this. I would like to see the most recent election voter data per neighborhood or by precinct, if that's what's available, of like eligible voters and number of registered voters, percentage of voters that voted in like the most recent election, and like the percentage of actual voting numbers to population. I just need to see the data explaining the numbers of eligible residents to vote. Like, can we get that like for residents over the age of 18 or immigrants that, you know, maybe residents or cannot register to vote? I just have people keep asking me about this info as it relates to the districts, and I can't give them a good answer at this point justifying our work so far.
I am going to, and I can provide this, the citizen voting age population, which provides you with those above the age of 18 who are citizens. And I can provide that at the precinct level. It will be the American Community Survey data that is, I call it 2014 to 2018 data, 5-year data. So it is, there is a time lag on the ACS data, but I can provide that. I am wondering what you or your individuals are looking for. And the second thing is whether the difference is this one precinct. So I imagine the difference would be whether to include this precinct or not. And I think, is that, Commissioner, is that your concern, whether that should be included or not included?
It's sort of, it's more of like all over, because it seems like these districts are kind of giving a greater voice to the underrepresented South, and that data kind of shows if there's like a pocket or something that we're missing that we should be concerned about, and it just gives more of a complete picture and kind of justifies what we're doing. I feel like I have a hard time voting for sure, confirming, you know, a district or a particular map without having all the data at hand.
Okay. But let me just be clear that there, if we are looking to attempt to keep neighborhoods whole, there are only so many configurations that we have that are allowable. And even when we split, there are only so many configurations that we can split by. And so, you know, I can provide that data. There's no question about that. And I will do so.
To clarify, I mean, I can vote and say to you what my preference is. I do not think that you should be dividing the district along Hewitt. I think that that's a horrible idea. So the stair step would be my preference on that. But before I can confirm for a map, it's problematic to me without looking at all the data, especially when I'm hearing from members in my community that want that information, and and so it makes me question why haven't we reviewed that as well for the whole entire map in general. Does that make sense? Like, the stair step is obviously better in my mind than dividing at Hewitt. That's
Okay.
Understandable. Okay. It's more of I'm having a hard time voting period for firmly on this is what the map should look like, and being able to justify that to the people asking me. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I understand what you're saying. And so what I was planning on doing was to provide you, once we firmly establish a plan or two, provide you with not only the voting age population, but also those socioeconomic attributes for each of the districts, so we would know what they are. And then you would have now the ability to, one, look at these plans to see if they're adequate, and maybe there's a change that's needed, but it's only a slight change, I would imagine, here and there, and maybe that precinct 18 would be one of those changes. But I can definitely provide you that information for the citizen voting age population. With the registration, I have to go back and obtain that. I looked at it for the Delta region and those precincts. I'll have to go back and attempt to pull that as well. That's a different process involved.
In order to, I know we talked last time about a timeline, and so we have a lot of work to do to figure out how we're going to have these community meetings that we have to have, especially in light of COVID-19. And Tony's plan to eliminate or narrow it down to 2 maps today. So on the 6th, we have 2 choices that you are adjusting or editing, however you want to say that, keeps us on track. So to come back on the 6th and take these votes makes me nervous on timeline. So it would be staff's recommendation that we move forward today with Tony's timeline and plan, and then come back on the 6th. And if there are questions or edits or things like that, this is not set in stone. You have until November to completely solidify your plan. And so I just want to put that out there, that I am trying to aggressively push us to stay on Tony's timeline for this.
I understand that, and I'll vote today with reservation, but I will vote today. I understand that.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that, we're looking at all of this, and I think we're pretty much all of us looking, and we're, want to make sure this thing is right. But I think getting a plan, we've said eliminate this and go along with this. And I was hoping, I think Nicole and Tony are saying what I'm thinking, that once we get the plan going, we do have the opportunity to look at it and say, hey, maybe we need to tweak this a little bit, but we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly.
To get this going.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the direction we want to go. And once we get it there, we can always look back at it and say, this isn't going so well. Can we move here a little, maybe to the left, to the right, or north, south, or whatever? But we've got to have something we've got to start working with, so that we're just not running around in circles. And I strongly suggest, in talking to the community, that we be very cautious about what we're saying. Loose lips do sink ships. And I think we have to be careful, because we don't know all the answers. We are a work in progress. Okay? That's all.
I agree. This is Chris. It sounds like we have enough confidence to vote between the 2 as a starting point. So I will make a motion to vote the commission between, I'm not sure how to refer to these, Plan A7 on slide 8 and Variation 1, which is keeping Bayside whole, would be option 2, slide 9. We have a second.
I have, well, yeah, it's confusing. I would say I would second the splitting of Bayside with a stair step. Plan A7.
Second.
So rephrase it to adopt Plan A7 that we're looking at now.
Yes, my motion would be to adopt Plan A7 as seen there on the slide.
All right, I think I heard John second that.
Yep.
All right, this is Chris Garai. I will vote approve, yes. Mary Fossey,
Approve, yes.
Jim Langus,
Yes.
Ethel McNeil,
Yes.
John Monroe,
Yes.
Kari Kwaf,
Yes.
Ben Young,
Yes.
and Julius Wilson.
Yes.
All right. Decision 1 complete.
Excellent. Excellent. That's great. So let me move back to the PowerPoint presentation. And so now we move to District 3, and the issues around District 3 centers around South Forest Park, keeping that whole inside District 3 and keeping Evergreen whole as well. And so right now this is Plan A, and so we have South Forest Park included, but in order to meet the population deviation, something has to be removed. And remember I said that 1,030 is 5%. So by removing this, it adds 1,200, or if we had that included in District 3, it would be 1,239 added to District 3, which would raise us above that 5%. So we have a choice. And it could be other choices potentially, because there's one choice that we could have, which is, splitting South Forest Park, but I'm going to show you this. This is without South Forest Park added to District 3, and we can keep Evergreen whole. And so we have each of these neighborhoods whole, except for that slight overlapping precinct that splits that neighborhood right here. However, we do have an increased deviation of 4.07%. So that's the trade-off that we have when we want to keep Evergreen whole and remove South Forest Park.
Do you know the amount of people that 4.7%, what the number is on that, Tony?
I can approximate it. It would be probably 80%, probably 800 people.
Thank you. I think approximate is good. Thank you.
Okay. So it's about 800 individuals low. And so if we look anything around here, well, if I go back, anything around here, we could actually take 1,233 people out of 46 and place it as well. I didn't show you that. I wanted to talk to you about that. Right now, this 45, precinct 45 is placed in District 5. And so we really have only the option, we only have the option of keeping South Forest Park included. We have to remove Evergreen, or we have removing South Forest Park, and therefore we can keep Evergreen. First one was splitting Evergreen. This is keeping Evergreen whole. Or I didn't include it in here because I didn't think it was desired by the commissioners, which is to split South Forest Park. And we did that in one of our plans previously, and I think you all said no, but we could go back to that. And so now I will open it up for discussion. What do you all feel, and how do you feel that we should split or not split South Forest Park, include or not include South Forest Park?
I don't think
I-
we should split South Forest Park myself, but maybe everybody sees it's a smaller community, and I would hate to see that split. But I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say about it.
Yeah, Ethel, this is John. I agree with you. I think South Forest Park is, I believe, our smallest neighborhood in the city, and I would hate for that to be split up even further. I originally wasn't too wild about the idea of splitting Evergreen, but when you look at these numbers, how close Tony has gotten them to zero. I can accept splitting of Evergreen the way that he's done here.
This is Kari. I would agree if we don't have to split South Forest Park, I would say let's not do that because it is kind of aligned within Forest Park and Evergreen. The way that Evergreen Way, excuse me, Evergreen neighborhood, the way that it drops where that portion is in District 5, if you are on the Maptitude or the Census Channel, it keeps all the schools together in District 5. Because there's one on the other side of Evergreen Way, and then keeping the residential part of Evergreen that would be the part farther west, along with Boulevard Bluffs, Harborview, Seahurst, Glenhaven, and all of that. So
I reside in South Forest Park. My purpose throughout has been to do what's best for the entire city. Not be parochial on this and just look at South Forest Park where I reside. When it comes to splitting Evergreen and South Forest Park, that's a tough one because there's, I think, a good reason to keep Evergreen intact. As I recall, there were a couple of options, and I'd have to go back in my notes where you could, and I believe Tony just showed us one of them at the south end of South Forest Park, where it's almost like Bayside in a way. It changes, and it narrows up as you get towards Peck's Drive, and you don't have the gully, you don't have Pigeon Creek separating a good part of Forest Park from View Ridge and those areas on the east side. As you get towards Peck's Drive, it kind of, if you look, you can see where it kind of narrows up. And so I'm not sure that, I don't know exactly where that line is that Tony has drawn, that squiggly irregular line. I don't know where that, what the northern boundary of that is. I guess if you could live, that's 57th or somewhere in that area. And by doing that, we can keep Evergreen intact. I think it's something we may want to consider.
this is Kari, Jim. That bottom line that you're looking at right below where it says Pinehurst is 75th Street. Yeah, right where he has it. That's 75th.
I'm thinking more of thank you. I'm thinking more of that line that he showed us, the slide a minute ago when he said when Tony said that he had presented a couple of options where South Forest Park at the very south tip was shown to be in District 3. That was the one. Tony, you could put that up. Maybe Kari can tell us.
Yeah, and Jim, that's Peck's Drive. Yeah, just above where it says View Ridge Madison in larger letters, that's the line across. A tiny little bit. Dexter Avenue, Fleming, Evergreen Way, that's Peck's. He's a little farther north, Tony. Right at the bottom part of South Forest Park neighborhood.
Okay.
Yeah, that line, the thicker green is Evergreen, and then that one east to west is Peck's. And that's a precinct line.
Yep. Peck's right there. And so what I was configuring to show you is that there are two ways, and actually a third way, of reducing District 3. And so this one adds to District 5. And let me show you the plan configuration of A7. So
I don't
yes?
know that we need to make this. I don't know that we need to make this more complicated, Tony. I think let's just stay with what you've talked about in terms of South Forest Park and Evergreen, and all I'm asking is, and Corey was trying to help, if you can just go to that exhibit of. I'm trying to hear somewhere. Let's see. It could be Plan A5 or Plan A1, either one, A4 or A5. You show that area at the bottom, and I don't want to take any more time here. We need to move along, but if you just take a minute to find what that boundary is, and whether that would keep us from having to split Evergreen.
Jim, if you look at that long sliver that he's talking about splitting off there, the from Evergreen Way over to Fleming, there's not a whole lot of, there's a lot of businesses in there on the Evergreen Way, and there's some old housing on the Fleming side. I wouldn't think that there's a lot of population along that segment. And so I'm beginning to think your thought about splitting that off from the South Forest Park probably makes a lot more sense, and then keeping Evergreen whole.
If we can get the population right, it may, John. That's why I'm trying to understand where that split would be at the bottom.
Well, let me clarify. I think we've decided we're not going to split precincts. I think that was what decided before. So our choices are really to include the entire South Forest Park, or to split South Forest Park right here with this precinct, or to remove South Forest Park from District 3. So we're not really, I hate to say we're not concerned, but this doesn't fall into play in any one of those. So our choices are, let me just show you. We either remove South Forest Park, except this area, because we have to grab this area because it's part of this precinct and we're not splitting precincts. If we want the precinct wholly contained, South Forest Park is what I'm talking about, we have to add these two back to District 3. And so our choices are to remove South Forest Park, wholly contained, and we would end up with a configuration as I showed you on the PowerPoint, which is this. This would be the configuration. And we'd have -4%, -4.07%. South Forest Park would be almost wholly contained in District 2, except for that sliver that we're going to have to live with. Or the option is we add South Forest Park to District 3. And if we do, we're above deviation. Yeah. So we either have to remove 45, precinct 45, or 46, or I didn't use 43 because I thought this was a good demarcation for District 4. But we only have three options, and we actually have a fourth, but I don't consider that an option. No one wants a district that comes down and has that piece added to District 2. That I think is not acceptable. So we have really two major choices: either remove South Forest Park or add South Forest Park and remove one of these precincts. So that's the decision. And what I was going to do is show you the other option of, right now we have the option in Plan A of removing 45. We also could have a configuration of removing 46 too and placing it in District 2. And so if we can move to making a decision on that, then we can cross out another one of those decision points that we need to make.
So this is Kari, and I have a question for Ethel, because 45, if that was pulled out of the Evergreen neighborhood, that's where Evergreen Middle School is. Does it make more sense from a teacher standpoint to have Cascade High School and Evergreen Middle School in the same district? Or anyone can, yeah.
It does, because Evergreen Middle School, well, let's put it this, half of Evergreen Middle School will feed into Cascade, another half will feed into Everett High School. And so the boundary lines have changed for the school districts stuff there now. So it could go either way.
I'm just thinking if it's left to the other side, then it isn't really, I mean, it's just not tied to the high school. It's kind of, Evergreen would be lone there. To me, it makes more sense to pull it east into District 5.
Pulling Evergreen into District 5?
Yeah. And to split the Evergreen neighborhood, I guess, is my thing. And that would keep South Forest Park together.
Okay, well, what would happen if we, well, you know, this is a long shot. We've got Cascade View there. What if Cascade View was moved over to over to 4 and pull Evergreen into 5? Would that be much of a headache to do?
Are you referring to precinct 42? This precinct right here?
Yeah.
That one right,
yes.
That one right there?
Yes.
That could, let me show you that. If this happens, and that's why we have this, we would still be within deviation. But now what we'd have to do is we'd have to add more to 5.
Well, Evergreen, Evergreen coming over to 5, is that a headache?
Yeah, let me show you this right here. And so it's slightly below the lowest deviation. You'd have to add something to 5. And I'm not so sure about this configuration. There would have to be a justification for that configuration, I would imagine.
Yeah, that looks worse than the stair step that we have in Bayside.
Yeah, I don't. Go ahead.
It does, you know, to see it.
Tony, this is Jim. I didn't mean to get us off track here at all, but so let me see if I. One thing, can you bring up District 3 with South Forest Park out, with South Forest Park out of District 3 and in District 2? And the reason I say that is South Forest Park actually is an island by itself, because I know that's not the correct description. It's bifurcated from View Ridge by Pigeon Creek. You have to drive all the way through Forest Park to get to any compactness with that area west of Forest Park. It neighbors District 2 and Port Gardner and Glacier View. And so can we just look at that? Can you bring up the graphic that shows South Forest Park out?
Okay.
And let's see what District 3 looks like with Evergreen in, and just that bottom area of South Forest Park in District 3.
So this is District 3 with South Forest Park out. So once again, we have that sliver of the precinct that's going to be in there because of the sliver of the precinct, because the precinct overlaps the neighborhood boundaries. But this is the configuration for South Forest Park.
Corey,
removed.
just keep that there. Corey, can you tell what the top end of that South Forest Park, at the bottom of South Forest Park, that area that's in District 3, what is that north boundary? What's that street there?
Give me 1 second.
You're talking 52nd
Yeah,
Street? 52nd Street, is that where you're looking?
Yeah, that flat line's 52nd.
That's 52nd. Okay.
And there's nothing we can do about that unless we split precincts.
What would happen if you went down to yeah, okay. If you went down to 57?
Well, we can't do that without splitting precincts.
I understand. But does the population get, well, I've said enough, and I think all of you understand the question here, and so thank you.
No problem.
This is John, the reason why I'm beginning to warm up to this one a little bit is because even though Evergreen, or even though District 3 is now showing at minus 4.07, the city just approved a 420 unit apartment complex in that precinct 45. And so that's going to bring that minus 4.07 up significantly.
Mm.
And so I think this is not a bad configuration.
Hey, John, is that the old Kmart building?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you're right. That's right. That's going to change things drastically when they take that and make that an apartment complex. So it may not. I have to agree with you there, John.
I need to chime in here because you're talking about something that is going to happen after the numbers are counted for the census. The census stops, the official count stops in October. Is the building going to be there before October? If it is not, which I don't think it is, we're still going to be using 2020 numbers, and the Kmart building is still not going to be factored in the next census. You're looking down the road, but you're looking down the road 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. Not next year, but 2 years from now, a minimum of 2 years from now.
So Ben, I agree with you, but the number minus 4.07 is still acceptable.
Okay.
And Evergreen Way is a natural boundary. It would be almost an unnatural boundary to split it the way that we had in that one scenario.
Tony, would you mind zooming out just for a brief moment to see the shapes of all the districts? Just curiosity.
Sure. Let me see.
Okay. Does anyone have any other concerns or questions? I think we've kind of altered your slide 13 a bit.
Right.
Am I correct, Tony?
That's correct.
Okay.
And so if we can move to determining District 3, I guess it would be, or whether South Forest Park is going to be added or removed, then we can cross out number 2.
This is Kari, and I maybe would defer to someone in the South End, but realistically, the way that looks to me now makes sense. In that, again, Evergreen, even if the neighborhood association isn't active right now, they would share that same Boeing effect that all of those other neighborhoods would. It keeps Evergreen Middle School in one district. It's going to be split from the high school, but that's okay because you have a lot of people in View Ridge, Madison, Harborview, Glen Haven, etc., that would go to that school. And it's very compact. It's a nice round thing. Like John said, Evergreen Way is a natural boundary. So I would go with what I'm seeing on the screen.
So if you just moved that, I would second it.
John,
Oh,
Carol,
moves. So moved.
Second.
John, okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
Now that requires a precinct split. Is that correct,
No.
Tony?
No. We
It
still
doesn't.
have
Okay.
we still have that segment, that sliver down in South Forest Park. So we still have this right here, that area.
Corey, can you very concisely make a motion for our notes and for people at home, please?
Yes, I will try. I would move that in the effort to keep most of South Forest Park together, except for the areas that we can't do much about because of a precinct line, keeping Evergreen whole, that District 3 as on the screen, I so move that we approve it.
I second it.
All right, before we take a vote, are there any residual questions or concerns with taking a vote? All right, this is Chris Garay. I vote yay. Mary Fossey,
Yay.
Jim Langus,
Yes.
Ethel McNeil,
Yes.
John Monroe.
Yes.
I think we know Kari's vote. Do we need to do that again?
I'll just say yes.
Ben Young
Yes.
and Julius Wilson.
Yes.
All right, so the movement passes. We have 2 decisions. Excellent.
Excellent.
Chris?
Yes, sir.
Chris?
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to be able to reserve the right to come back at some point and ask the committee and Tony to look at moving that boundary from 52nd further south. I know that apparently, I can't tell from my information in front of me, but I'm hearing apparently, Jim, that's going to split up a precinct. And so I'd like to be able to come back at some point and look at that, because we may find that because of other circumstances going forward with the rest of our mapping, that we may have to do that another place as well. So I like this better than the option we were given. I'd like to come back and be able to look at that, moving that boundary further south from 52nd.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Thank you.
So quick time check. We're at 7:25. We have one more decision point and a couple of comments. Does anyone have an issue extending maybe 20 minutes? Okay.
That's fine.
Back to you, Tony.
All right. Well, maybe this is a moot point now, but there was the commissioners mentioned lowering the deviation in District 4 and 5 on that Plan A7. We now have a deviation of above 4% minus, and so the deviation in 4 is less. I'm not sure if that's a concern, but I'll go through the sort of mindset of District 4 and its creation. We have Casino Road, which runs all the way down Westmont, but then curves over here up through Pinehurst, Beverly Park area. And so the Westmount became the natural neighborhood for Casino Road. And in keeping with continuing to try to make this a whole neighborhood and included, all of these precincts, you notice that they split basically the precincts. So this precinct, and this precincts all was the starting point really for the sort of the District 4. So the question becomes now, what areas of precincts do you add? And so these precincts, if you look at the makeup, once again, the precinct attribute map, you see socioeconomically they match up with Westmont fairly nicely, I think. And so Holly became a logical choice to try to add to Westmont. The other aspect is that this is an irregularly shaped area right here, precinct rather, that really makes it makes District 4 much less compact if we add that. And so that wasn't added. So the question was, well, which precincts do you add? Well, if you add 55, that makes Holly whole a little bit more. And 47, that makes Holly whole. So both Westmont and Holly are wholly contained in District 4, except for a little sliver right there. So now the question is, what do you do? Do we add the precinct 40 to bring that deviation down? And in Plan 7, A7, if we added precinct 40, District 4 would become lower and better deviation, but then District 5 is higher. And if we add 42, District 4 becomes a slightly lower, but now we have this irregularly shaped precinct added to the district. And so we had those two choices, which I thought, in my estimation, I concluded that the Plan A7 configuration is the best plan configuration for 4. And that's how I got here at the end. And so are there any questions on the configuration of District 4? And let me go back to the Maptitude map so we can actually see.
Thank you. You read my mind.
So now,
could I see how it looks with 42 added, just to see, just for giggles?
Sure. And right now, okay. So right now, it is a slight different configuration. If we decide to go with this configuration, adding 40, it still may be best suited for District 5 more than 4, but the deviations come down. But we still have this -4, so I wouldn't be concerned with the deviation of 4 if we determine it's better suited for 4 versus 5.
We can go back to, go ahead. I'll wait.
Any questions? And let me just say, by my estimation, eyeballing it, I don't know if you all have done the same, and I'll come up with specific data when we actually create it. This will probably peak as a majority-minority district. Won't be probably with voting age population, won't be with citizen voting age population, most likely, but it'll probably be total population, probably be majority minority, and I'm talking without 40 included. And you can look at the precincts attribute map and approximate, and that's 2019 population. That's not the 2010 population. So those are estimates for 2019.
This is Chris. I guess just looking at a map purely, it seems like the lower line there, having 40 in District 5, kind of might be a little less disruptive. It seems like you have that little kind of triangle south of the main road there. That Correct. Said, unless there's some compelling reason, I might be in favor of balancing out those deviations.
I agree with you, Chris.
Any other
Yeah,
comments?
this is
Yep.
John. I think that looks fine.
Ethel, you're familiar with that area. What is your thinking on this matter?
Well, I'm looking and if I'm looking at this correct, the tip end of Twin Creek would end up being in District 4, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I would like to see, Twin Creek stay whole. And I'm thinking Cascade View seems to be running in there, out through there more than Twin Creek. Corey, you've got maybe a different map than what I look at, but I'm thinking that Cascade View actually ends up bumping up against Westmont and Holly, as opposed to Twin Creek.
Yeah, it's just these precinct lines really are.
Right.
I mean, there's precinct number 95 incorporates parts of all three of those neighborhoods.
Right.
So,
Right.
and then that very farthest southwest tip is Everett 64, and it has that little bit of Twin Creeks and then Holly as well. So it's kind of like there's nowhere to really go unless it's kind of that north and east.
Right.
So that's like 107th place southwest and going on down to
the bottom end of Twin Creeks is 1/12th in that southwest corner, or excuse me, yeah, southwest corner.
Yeah.
And then it goes up to 105th is showing, but that's not the line. The precinct line is actually a block north of that. And then it's unincorporated, so.
Right. But that's 105th place west.
Street south.
Street, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But it's the west end of it and stuff. Yeah. Whoa. Yeah, I strongly, I would say making Twin Creeks stay in District 5, if at all possible. But, if it goes the other way, I could see more of Cascade View going over to Westmont Holly and in that area because it's close, more,
Ooh.
Pardon me?
It's kind of, Ethel, it's just kind of impossible.
I see.
Third Avenue Third Avenue Southeast is that north-south line, and
it
makes these weird little triangles.
Right.
And you kind of incorporate where it splits off to Everett Mall Way.
I know that because when you look at it, from day one when I looked at that, I thought, I couldn't understand that split off of Cascade View actually being Cascade View and not being a part of Twin Creek. But I understand where the lines are drawn and stuff like that. It's harsh right in there. But anyway.
This would be an alternative. This would actually have more of Twin Creeks in District 5, but still Cascade View now is more in District 4 because the population's got to come somewhere.
Right.
Does that keep more of Casino Road together that way? Doesn't that incorporate a longer piece of it if you keep Cascade View in that area?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Nicole, what are your thoughts there?
My thoughts is just, Casino Road is one of our most diverse areas, and it's kind of a long, skinny strip. And, if that was something we were worried about, it might be a good idea to keep as much of that road together as possible.
Well,
and
I agree. I agree with that. I don't want to see Casino Road split at all. I want them to stay together. That's important here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, from a minority perspective, just purely minority perspective, this Precinct 81 has a higher percentage of minorities than 42. And so that's just data, that's just information that's out there.
Mary, was that you that commented before Ethel? I couldn't tell whose voice that was.
Cool.
It was Ethel.
No, before Ethel, was that Mary?
I
I
thought
think
it
that
was
was
Nicole.
Nicole.
I think it was Nicole.
No, it was Nicole.
Yeah.
My thinking on District 4 is to make sure that here's what I'm concerned with. Districts 1, 2, and 3 get a pretty good voter turnout, and so does District 5. District 4, if we don't, we need to make sure we get as, sometime with the turnout in District 4, you could very well have somebody based on past voting records, the voter turnouts, you could have somebody being elected with 1,000 votes cast. We're in Districts 1, 2, 3, and 5. So I think we need to try and get us that deviation population as close as possible to giving them a much population to help with their turnout in deciding elections.
I agree with you, Jim. I forgot about, I don't want to see Casino Road dropped off. I want to see them receive a fair share of everything. And you're right about the voting there. When I think about that, I have a great concern for that area.
So is this a more agreeable configuration than the original configuration that I showed for A7, where it would have more of Cascade View?
If we move forward with this, we'll still be able to go back and analyze the voter data, correct, Tony?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything that we move forward with, we will come back and look at that data, whether it's this option or a completely different one.
Right.
We will absolutely come back and look at that data.
Yeah, I feel like this third exercise is kind of a fine tuning more than a major discussion like the other 2 points. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yes.
So is this a major blocker from preparing our draft plan, Tony?
No. What I wanted was the decisions on all three, and then after we made them, we have our plan or plans if we could not make a firm decision. So I'm wondering is if this is a configuration, then we would choose this. If the other configuration was also an option, then maybe we would look at both.
I'd like to defer to Ethel and Julius on this area. And what is the deviation percentage in what you're showing us on the screen? It's a little unclear to me. What is the deviation percentage for District 4?
4 is 3.74, and 5 is minus 1.96.
So it's gone. So District 4 has gone from minus 2.42 to plus 3, and 3 plus.
Correct.
Yeah, Chris, you're at Silver Lake, and your percentage has apparently been increased from 0.64 to what?
Minus 1.96.
1.196. So that would be, how many votes are you talking about there, Tony? Voters.
Probably about 250 voters. Minus 250 voters.
Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like
So
this is
if
an
I-
area we can kind of do our best, and then this is where the community input can kind of help us fine tune that.
I'd
later.
like to chime in here. While I think that Ethel's point of trying to get as much of Casino Road as possible is great, but I think that what you're actually doing is now giving that area more selection of candidates. And what you, and because you've already said that the number of votes could be decided by as few as 1,000 votes, and I'm saying, so what? We're trying to make sure that Westmont Holly area has an adequate voice at the table. And having that deviation go back to the original where we were at 4 and 5 is going to give you that while one side you're saying, hey, you want more of Casino Road, but now you're broadening the area to the point where you're taking away from Westmont Holly area and having a true and significant voice there by adding someone to the voters roll. And this is, we've in each one of these districts or questions that we've talked about, they've all been different questions that have come to the table. This one, you're talking about voter representation. The one prior to it was something different, and the initial one was something different. So there isn't any consistency in the conversation that's being had. It's kind of all over the map. And while me personally, I could live with either one, I just think that I would like to have a stronger voice coming from Westmont Holly without the undue influence from Cascade View.
Can we go back and look at the other map, Tony? Is that possible? What we had before this?
Sure.
I think you make a good point, Ben. I don't know that we've been all over the map, but I think on this discussion with this, in terms of your point on the making sure they have a good representation, I think that's a good point you just made.
I would agree with that. I don't want to see us lose voting in there at all, but I definitely want Casino Road to have a voice.
Well, and I think I agree with Ben too. I think that what happens when you add more Cascade View people to it, it dilutes that district with more people outside of that particular area. Because the side to the west of Evergreen is where it is the most diverse as opposed to the east side of it. I haven't looked at the data specifically, but I agree that you start to dilute it. And I go back to what Chris, I think, said many, many weeks ago, which was when we were looking at Delta and you look at the ethnic and different languages spoken and all that up north, you end up with District 4 that can represent that voice on the council, which is kind of what we're left with. That's where they live, and that's where it makes sense to keep them concentrated. So that way they truly have a voice and are equally weighted with the other districts across the city.
I mean, and Corey, I don't disagree with you there. Because when you look at Cascade View, if you were to really actually go out and walk that neighborhood, it actually sits just below Cascade High School. And, and so, and I understand what you're saying. So, I definitely don't want them to, are you saying that, I think what I've always found is that the diversity is on the west side. You have more of the language barriers on the west side of that area.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, that's what I'm imagining. I believe that more of the racial diversity and everything, it falls to the west side of Evergreen.
West side, right. I would agree with you there. Yes. Okay. So I'm okay with leaving Cascade View where it is in 5 and making sure that a Casino Road is represented. Julius, what's your view on it? You live in that area.
I'm kind of torn because Ben, he made a really good argument, But as I look at the map, man, I live here also. I kind of feel that if we were to have it the way it was with Cascade Views in Westmont, and some of those voters in Westmont that's more, or that have been more active in voting, they can teach, and you could say school, the people that want to get more active or that are getting more active from Westmont. So if you to blend the two, hopefully people will interact, network with each other, and teach each other. But also, like I said, I'm kind of torn because Ben does make a good argument. So I'm more for, I look at America as a melting pot, not just Everett, all of America. And so, I see Everett the same way. So I'm more for, if there's language barriers or whatnot, for we to break those, and how we can break those if we congregate with each other from different cultures, things like that. So I'm not really sure yet. I'm still thinking.
Well, I'm always on my bandwagon of gerrymandering, and that is something I definitely do not want to see. And looking at what I was seeing at first, it might happen. So I think I'd have to go along with you, Ben.
So are we ready for a motion to accept the current view?
Does this put the population back? Does this put the population back into District 5?
When you say put the population back, what are you referring to?
The population deviation was a minus 1.1 something, and as a result of the previous discussion. And then Ben made a good point. We have now revised our thinking for tonight, and my question is, with this current plan, what does that do to Silver Lake's deviation?
Right now, if we go back to the original configuration for District 4, it's minus 2.42 for District 4 and 4.2 for District 5.
Okay.
Any concerns with that? John, would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, so moved.
I second.
Second. All right. This is Chris Garay. I say yay. Mary Fossey.
Yay.
Jim Langus.
Yes.
Ethel McNeil.
Yay.
John Monroe.
Yes.
Kari Kloss.
Yay.
Ben Young.
Yay.
And Julius Wilson.
Yay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So those are our three questions. Tony, any other closing remarks or questions? Or
No. If we answer those questions and everyone agrees, this really becomes the plan right here. This is the plan. There may possibly be some swap out here on 5. I'm still not sure at this particular moment. I don't think so, but if not, this becomes the initial draft plan.
excellent.
Yay.
Okay. Before we talk about next steps and close, Mary, did you want to take a couple of moments to share your thoughts?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So since I've heard from several community members, I feel like I've attempted to kind of advocate for community engagement, and I sort of feel like I need to state publicly that I feel that we haven't made a good enough effort as a commission to include public input and comments. People want that option, and I understand that I'm in the minority on that one, but and some people feel that comments at this time in the process can kind of be cumbersome and messy. but I believe that equity and inclusion and transparency isn't supposed to be easy, and otherwise we would have already done it. And I am a little worried that our commission's lack of effort in that arena might come back to haunt us kind of in the public's perception of this process. And that's kind of some of the stuff I've already been hearing from in the community. And especially due to COVID, I think we probably should have had more of a robust effort for public input. I know we're working on the education part, and we'll be working on the engagement part, but going forward, I really think we should consider having an option for public comment in our meetings. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Good topics. I feel like now that we're at the point where we have a initial proposal here for the map, we can really start turning our attention to that topic, as well as you mentioned, kind of figuring out how the sections are going to look with the public and so forth. So maybe that's a good topic to start our next meeting, or to include in our next meeting.
Okay, so is that saying you're not going to include public comment in our next meeting?
So I thought that.
Just to clarify, there was one point when this was brought up before by Tony and staff, that the commission voted to revisit this conversation in July, which would be at technically our next meeting. So that was voted on at one point to bring that up back in July.
That what I don't recall that. What I recall was that once we had, which is kind of, it may be saying the same thing, but because I was one that was pushing for an earlier public comment, at least to have the public come in and speak for a minute or two. And now that we have a proposed plan that we're going to an educational process, before we go to the educational process, I think that there does need to be a public comment, so that when we go, it makes it more palatable for us to discuss this and say, hey, yes, we did take some public input. Although, again, I'm saying that it is a little late in the game. But I just as Mary pointed out, we were outvoted there, and I can live with that. But from moving forward, I think that maybe as much as 10 or 15 minutes that we should, or maybe 5 to 10 minutes that we should allow for public comment moving forward, period. That means to have public comment at the next meeting, not to wait and discuss whether or not we're going to have public comment at the next meeting.
Well, I do recall that we did have a vote as well, and that we had discussed that the meetings were the opportunity for the public to become involved. If we want to revisit that, I think it is a conversation, and I'm not sure we have time to do that this evening. Does anyone have any other input or opinions on that?
I think we should have our next meeting as planned without the public comment. And I also would like to say, when it comes time for public comment, I think we need to listen. I think we need to stand firm as a commission and be together. I think it's very important that they don't see divisiveness on our part. And I think we need to have the next meeting without the comment, and then discuss this at the next meeting, so that we're all on the same page together and we're in agreement.
I'm missing something here, because when the public comes through, they're making a comment. That doesn't mean that we have to respond immediately to them. What it does mean, though, is that we hear what they have to say. It doesn't mean that we have to take a vote right then and there on the spot. But we do have to make sure that people are heard before things get so solid that there's no opportunity for them to comment.
Thank you, Ben. I agree with that. And I just want to remind people that in this era of COVID, it's much more difficult to engage with the community and have that feedback back and forth. And our outreach is going to be much more difficult. And I think it looks better on us as a commission to be able to say, yes, we did allow for public input. That was another avenue for you guys to engage and get your voice heard, because it is going to be limited now going forward because we can't meet in person. So I think we need to seriously consider that and at least make it an opportunity for people. Who knows if anyone will even sign up to do it, make it an opportunity for someone to have a public comment at our next meeting.
And this is Flora from legal. And I guess my question is whether we should schedule an extra meeting to make sure that if you are going to be coming up with the procedures that you want to use for public comments or just further discussion about when you want to start receiving public comments, whether this is another time when you should be scheduling an extra meeting as well, instead of keeping the currently scheduled amount of meetings.
I think our next meeting was to be scheduled, was it for the 6th of July, Nicole?
Correct.
Okay. So I respectfully, I'm going to disagree with that. I think that is our next meeting. It's coming up pretty soon, and we can have that discussion because it seems like there is more than just do we want to or do we not want to. There's probably some things that people want to say. We'd need to put it to a vote, and we'd need to have some sort of a plan. If it really is as simple as let's have 15 minutes at the beginning of the next meeting, someone is welcome to propose that, and we can vote on it right now. But I'm not sure if there's more discussion that people would like to have prior to doing that.
I'm sorry, Mary, but there is, we do need to create an avenue for that. I need to discuss that with with PIPA who broadcasts these meetings. We have to set up an additional line. And in the light of COVID and staff changes and things like that, I would ask that you give us more than a two-week turnaround, to make sure that everyone who wants to provide comment we can reach, and B, because it does require coordination of at least 3 staff members, which I don't currently have on call for a 6 p.m. meeting, and I need to arrange that.
Hey, Chris, if you have time, perhaps you and Nicole and Simone can bring back a proposal next meeting for a public, some kind of a public comment plan.
That I could do. I could definitely bring a proposal back next week. I just couldn't be ready yet.
I'd like to chime in here. While I don't disagree that Chris and Nicole can come in and probably help shape that comment, but we're talking two sides of the same coin there. If Mary and myself have already been voted out, we're not going to have any say-so as to what public comment looks like. So I'm either we're going to have it at the next meeting, strictly have that conversation at the next meeting, or if you're going to have a separate meeting, that one or the two of us are there at that table. I don't want to be on the menu. I want to be at the table.
This is Kari.
I think that's.
May I chime in?
I think that's fair. Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I agree. I think that COVID has changed the landscape of all of this. We probably potentially would have had public comment already, but I think that the time that it has taken us to gel as a commission, to understand what we're hearing, to make these decisions, of which there have been many, and the web page is updated, and then there's the communication to follow. I think that it's reasonable to take public comment on the process and maybe just to hear where people are. I'm glad we have an initial draft plan. Go us. I mean, I think part of it too was that we weren't going to take public comment until we had kind of set the table, as it were. I like that phrasing, to then go, here's what we've come up with so far. What do you think about it? So I think that we've done that. and it would make sense to me to move forward to public comment, and then we can fine tune as we go forward. What I would like to hear from Tony perhaps is what he anticipates our next meeting to be about, because he's going to go back and fine tune this. But what does July 6th meeting look like anyway? What are the topics we'll be covering at that one? And does it make sense to allow 15 minutes at the beginning to just take 2-minute comments from 10 people or whatever? Not exactly right math.
So what I'm expecting to do between now and the next meeting, which is short now, it's usually a month, is to provide this plan with the same information that we've done before, which is the same reports. But then we're going to move down the level in detail. So I'm going to have maps on each of the districts, of course, zoomed in. If hopefully it's only one zoom. I'm going to actually look at. I'm going to run the enrichment process, that ESRI enrichment process on each of the districts, so we'll know and define. Have definitions of each of these districts and the attributes associated with it. I'm now going to add the citizen voting age population so we can look at that as well. And then I planned on actually adding a level of detail on sort of geographic areas that may be included in this district. The downtown areas included in District 2, discussing maybe some of the streets potentially. I may not be, because we have such a short timeline, I may not be able to get the detail that I would get normally in a month, but I'm going to move to a different level. So then you all will now see that different level, review that, and either make a decision, because now you have a different level of information to actually look at. And so you will make that decision, yes, this is our initial draft plan. Or you may decide that, well, maybe we should change something now that I see this or that.
Thank you, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
We could easily, at our next meeting, over the next 2 weeks, I could easily accept email public comment from the community and distribute that out to everyone. If I don't want you to think that staff is not willing to start on this. We absolutely are. So if the commission wants to start accepting written comment for the next meeting, that is something I could start and put out there tomorrow and get going on that.
I think that's a great compromise. I actually, that's totally acceptable to me, without reservation.
What will be done with that written? I mean, is it something where we would be reading the comments, or is it something where you would distribute them via email? I
could distribute them via email, put them on the website, read them out loud, and any combination of those options.
Can we get them via email so we know, so we can see it for ourselves and who sent these in?
Yeah.
I think that's very important. And I think we want to hear what the community has to say, but I think we all have to be on the same page and in agreement with what we're doing. We need to look at what we've come up with here tonight and view it once Tony has put it together. Let's look at it ourselves so we can be familiar with it. And maybe, if we have questions, we need to figure out for ourselves before we can go out then to the public. You don't, I think we've got to be together here. I think we need to look at this thing, and but if you want to go ahead and accept comments from them via email, but that's not with the promise to them that we're going to do what they say do. We're going to read those and go over them, but I don't want it to be said that they get to change and make no differences here in what we've already decided tonight, because right now we need to look at what we've done tonight once it's all done.
Although I absolutely agree with that. But there isn't any but. I absolutely agree with that. We are going to be the decision makers here, period, point blank. In the end, come January, it's our decision. But we're going to be able to weigh the value of some of the comments. It doesn't mean that every time somebody says, I need you to change one street, that we're going to act on it, because that's next to impossible. We could have 125,000 different comments, and it's just not feasible for us to even think in those terms. So I agree with you.
Yeah, because we've got to make sure that that's clear to the public, because running out and saying we're going to take your comments could send a whole lot of different messages out there. So we've got to be really clear about what we're doing here.
So for anyone listening at home, I will make sure my email address is on the website. I will send out all emails we get for comment we get for the districting commission immediately to our commissioners. I will also put them together into a PDF, and then before the meeting, I will put them on the website so the community can see what other community members have said. I will retract phone numbers and email addresses from those as well. So I'll try to keep it as retract all types of personal information that I think I would like to see retracted if I were providing comments. So everyone is and we can just do a feel vote. So Chris can do on all in favor, and we can put that on the website and get that up and everywhere else too.
All in favor of accepting written feedback from the public? Say aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Excellent. Well, Mary, thank you for raising that, and Ben as well. I think we're all on the same page that's a certainly important part of this whole process. So I think that'll be a good start. We can have some more discussion at our next call, and hopefully we have a good starting point for that. So any other remarks before I close?
Yeah, before we do close, we have one the 6th. Should we go ahead and preserve one also then for the 20th, just so that our calendars are set?
I'm fine with that, John. This is Kari.
I'm okay with that.
Tony, how do you feel about that?
I have to check my schedule. I think I'm okay.
Okay. All right.
I think it's a fabulous idea.
Tony, will you have anything for us on the 20th? Or will it just be for public comments?
It will depend upon what you all say on the 6th.
That's right.
It's just a reserve meeting in case we need it, I think, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We can always cancel.
Yeah. I would like, just on a note of looking ahead, that our September meeting, the first one of the month, is Labor Day. And I would move it back 1 week to August 31st.
Ooh, hang on.
Can we move it ahead to the week after Labor Day?
Well, here's my concern with the moving ahead, or moving it to the 14th, is that if we are doing these public meetings in September, we're going to need.
Who are you? Who's speaking?
This is Kari. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
That we have more time. So basically, pretend that we're meeting on September 1st. We're not. It's the 31st of August. That gives us the whole month to have those public meetings. If we move from the 7th to the 14th, then we're cutting our month in half.
Okay. I'm not looking at the calendar, so I'm gonna. Well, let me look at the calendar.
I'll just put that out there as food for thought. I was looking at the calendar and went, well, we all want Labor Day as Labor Day. I think maybe even more so this year for some. So.
Yeah.
I support earlier rather than later on that.
Okay. Yeah. September starts. In a little bit later. That's why the 14th ends up there being. Yeah. Okay. So August 31st would be the last Monday of August.
Correct.
Okay.
And so we can solidify that on the 6th, and I'll put a hold for the 31st on everyone's calendar. And Tony, on the 6th, you can make sure that the 20th will work if we need that meeting. If not, we'll cancel it. Everyone right now should have gotten an email hold for the 20th. I just set that out.
I think I'm in DC that week, but that's fine. That weekend, I'm going to the March on Washington. So but on the 31st, I will go over to my sister's house and probably chime in from there if I'm not on the plane. I can't remember exactly what the reservations are.
Perfect. So August 31st, then cancel Labor Day and move to August 31st, and then July 6th and 20th.
Yes. This is Kari, yes.
This is Ben, yes.
This is Ethel, yes.
John, yes.
Jim, yes.
Chris, I'm sure that'll work for me.
Julius, yes.
Okay, anyone else? Comments?
I'd move to adjourn.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for the extra time, and my fellow commissioners and city staff, and Tony and everyone listening. Appreciate the extra time. It was a good meeting, and yes, I second that movement to adjourn.
All right. Have a good day. Enjoy your night.
I second. Have a great evening. Be safe.
All right.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.